Hello and welcome to Research the News. Today we're doing something a little different. We're introducing a new co-host. His name is Ben Hardt, and we've been friends for a very long time and have had a ton of political discussions. And oftentimes those discussions come from different perspectives. But one of the things that's great about talking with Ben is that we usually leave just fine and friendly, and sometimes we learn things. So we decided, hey, you know what? Let's start doing this on a regular basis. And so now I'm going to introduce you to my co-host, Ben Hardt. Ben, how are you?
Ray, doing well. How about you, man?
Good, man. It's good to have you on the show. We've talked about this for a while. I'm glad to kick it off, and I think we have some pretty interesting conversations. Hopefully, other people think they're at least like 5% as interesting as we think they are ourselves.
How many podcasts do you feel like that's a premise for? That they're like, oh, we're cool. Our conversations, we're going to change the world. We should do a podcast.
I would say 99%. Yeah. I mean, basically, yeah. I saw a meme yesterday that was talking about that, and it was like, hey, how about those checkout clerks? That's always tough to go through. And people are like, yeah, man, that's really tough. And then people expect to get 1 million views. And that is us, basically,
I would say the difference, knock on wood, and, maybe everybody else says this too. I feel like most of those podcasts are all the same sort of echo chamber people, whereas to what you were saying at the beginning in your intro there, like we agree probably maybe 50% of the time and disagree 50% of the time.
Yeah.
Coming from different angles. But yeah, I've still been friends for almost 20 years now. So
yeah, man, don't say that out
crazy
loud.
to think about.
That's embarrassing.
I
will
since
say
we
this.
were like in kindergarten. So,
Of course. I will say though, and this is something that Ben and I will do all the time. I'll say I agree with you, but I would say I would change it a little bit. I would say that the end goals we're trying to get to, we probably agree with 80 or 90% of the time. The ways of getting there, it might be 20 or 30. So I think to me, and those scales are slidable, but I think generally our end results are the same.
I would say that's true. There's probably some big things that we disagree on, which we may always or may not always disagree on, which I think are also big political things that people in general disagree on, but that's what's cool about our friendship. And I would say also the thing that is cool is I think that we've both come away learning information that we didn't know sort of in whatever sides, news sources that we usually read. Like there's things that you've brought to the table. I was like, oh, I should consider that. And I haven't thought about that before. And I think hopefully the same for you on the other, on your side too. So,
well, I think both that and also, I think I've told you this before. Actually, I'll say this. One time, Ben and I were talking, and I think this is the sign of true friendship and true discourse. Ben called me a steamroller one time when we were talking about politics. And, for like 2 seconds, I thought, what? And then I thought, oh yeah, he's right. And then I actually now, I'm not perfect. I'm trying to get better, but it's something that stuck with me. So it wasn't said out of anger. It was just actually a comment that was pretty direct and straightforward. And I've always tried to consider myself someone who can hear other opinions. And I was like, wow, maybe I'm not. So yeah, I think both learning new things from your perspective and also too, I think it's good to have someone who can call you out when you're being a little ridiculous. So now that Love Fest is over, yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and start talking about some issues here. But do you want to give a little background on yourself and what kind of political background or thought background you come from? You can start as young or as old as you want in your history.
Yeah. And quick note, I'm in Brooklyn, New York. You will hear sirens and stuff going on in the background, which may tip off some of my political leanings too, right? It was funny. I'll tell you after this, it's a really funny, we were having ridiculous conversations with people in the bar last night of strangers. I was sort of with a crew that will just go up to anybody and ask them anything. And we were I think we're only getting honest answers because we're in Brooklyn, New York. Anywhere else we would get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you that after this, but because it's a really ridiculous set of questions. But yeah. Are you cool with how we met? I mean, I think that's an interesting story, right?
Although that makes it sound like it's kind of creepy. So but it's not. It's not. So go ahead. No, talk about how we met, Ben.
Well, we met at a really interesting sort of new church. It was called a church plant at the time, which is kind of the thing that I think. So one, if I may say, one key difference that Ray and I are at this point, Ray, you're still involved in your faith, and I've sort of walked away from it in a sense. And so that's definitely sometimes a point of difference between us, but in very respectful ways, right?
Yep.
But we both met at this sort of new church, which I think if there is a Christian church, if there is a model for what it is supposed to look like, it met in the cafeteria of a Goodwill building. There was no actual building. We had lunch after the service every Sunday, and everybody came. Folks who were who like lived on the street, folks who were in wealthier areas, folks who were tattooed from top to bottom, folks who dressed nice for church on Sunday. It was a really cool melting pot, and I think a very unique thing that only lasted really in that way for a couple of years. But anyway, it was a lot of interesting people, and Ray and I became friends out of that, both growing up around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents, just to give that little like more background, Dad voted Republican, Mom voted Democrat. And so I had this interesting mix of political views in my household.
Did they ever just not go to vote since they were going to cancel each other out? Because that would save some time.
No, they were both stubborn enough that I felt like they thought that their one vote was going to cancel the other one's out.
Fair enough.
Yeah. They're like, no, I better do it, or else he's going to get it, or she's going to get it. But I will say my respect for them is they both were thoughtful about it. They weren't just, I think that there's some amount of like, Mom was a school teacher, and so she was in school teachers union, and there was that aspect of it. And Dad's was a small business owner. And there's that, there's sort of this stereotypical leanings there. But I mean, that is also a fairly conservative leaning area of Pennsylvania.
It actually was right near where the Trump assassination attempt happened, which is kind of counterintuitive to being a conservative area. But yes, it is generally a very conservative area.
And it is. We had a good discussion on why we thought, why security was potentially the way it was, et cetera, because that area, I was just going to say, case in point, I had extended family at the rally at the time. Like I knew about it before it hit the news because they were texting and calling, which was really crazy. We could get to that, or we could get that in another episode or something. But grew up in that my farm is a 100-acre farm in the middle western Pennsylvania. Kids had like rebel flags flying from their trucks on the way to high school. I was like, we're in Pennsylvania, we're in the north, Pennsylvania, right? As Shane Gillis has brought to light. And so, I did that. And now I lived in Nashville for a number of years. So that was sort of the blue dot in the red state, but it is really pretty purple at this point. A lot of people moved there out after COVID that were more conservative out of California, New York, et cetera. So I've always had this melting pot of political, well, yes and no. I mean, it's been mostly white, let's be honest, right? But and maybe more lower middle to middle class. But my exposure has been a little bit more of a melting pot of politics, as opposed to I grew up here and this is what my parents believed and this is what I believe, So, and we're both world travelers, so I think that plays into our sometimes political, bigger picture stuff. I've thought, we just spent a week in Ireland together, arguing like an old couple in the car.
3 or 4 hours a day of Irish countryside and political discussions. So it was fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then going to the pubs at night and meeting people, which was really cool. But I don't know. So musician by night, a VP at a digital marketing agency by day. So professional, little artistic mindset, but always was a thinker, always was a little philosophical in my discussions, et cetera. And I think over the years, you find folks who are that way as well. That's sort of maybe intelligence and awareness level, and maybe you don't always disagree, case in point, or always agree, case in point. But it's game respects game kind of thing. So I think that's why we've been friends for so long. But that's a tiny background story.
Yeah, well, I like it. And I think actually I want to change the name of the podcast to Game Respects Game now. I feel like that's much better. So let's talk about that off camera. But
all right, deal.
Yeah, no, I think
see
that's
if that
great
website's open, the URL's open.
I doubt 100% that Game and Respect Game is open, but I'm going to check now.
It's probably a betting site.
I'm going to check before I put this up on the web, but definitely a betting site. Well, I'll give a little background on me. I think a lot of people who have listened before will know some of it, but I actually didn't go as in-depth as you did in the past, and I'll just kind of cover that because I think it's good to discuss. I think my background is oddly dissimilar growing up. I grew up around mostly liberal people, more towards the city. If you're from around Pittsburgh and know Penn Hills, that's where I went to elementary school, and I like to claim that because it gives me more street cred. And so didn't have much money at all. I mean, I grew up on welfare and food stamps and all that fun stuff. And as far as traveling, like, yes, now I love traveling, love exploring new places. But up until I was 18, I had left Pennsylvania to go on a car trip to Texas with my first of many stepdads and to Niagara Falls for a day. I think that was it. I don't remember any other time that I left. Cleveland for one day. So there we go. It was like world traveler. But since then, when I was 24, I flew for the first time. And since then, I've tried to get out and explore the world and learn more. So we have a little bit of dissimilarity there. I did not grow up in the church, where I think, Ben, having your dad around, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you kind of grew up in a church.
Oh, no, he wasn't religious. He was actually not. Yeah.
See, I made assumptions. This is a great way to talk about assumptions because,
right?
Yeah, your mom.
Because he was Republican, you thought he took us to church.
That's exactly why I thought that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, I'll just briefly, we didn't really grow up religious. My mom took us to church because she thought it would be sort of a good social support structure, which I think a lot of people do. And you're in your intro, so I won't go too far into that. But and then I sort of did it on my own, actually. Yeah. Like I would drive myself to church when I was 17.
That's interesting. So I started a little bit later than you. I was 23, 24 when I started going to church. Just really wanted kind of a change in my life. So we both were late to the game, but similar. I went to church a few times, some of like vacation Bible school, that kind of stuff, but it wasn't really a part of my life or family's life. And I think at this point, just to touch on faith, where I'm at now, I don't attend church regularly, but I do a Bible study with a group of guys that are really close to me, and we meet every couple weeks, and it's still a daily part of my life, but it's something that I don't necessarily go to a specific building for anymore. So it's more of an internalized thing. But as far as political backgrounds go, I think when I was real young, I never told this story before, but I was really sad when Ronald Reagan left office. And people are probably going to go, Ronald Reagan, people who are more liberal. For me, it wasn't about politics. It was about, if you're listening to the podcast, Ben just raised his hand. But for me, I was just, Reagan was like the only person I knew when I was a kid. So I was kind of sad. I was like, wait, he's always been my president, like since I was born. Like, so it was more of I had no idea what I was talking about. And then I think I registered as a Democrat initially, mostly because I was like, oh, we're a democracy, which also is not true. There's some differing opinions, but we're not. Right. We're a republic. But so I registered as a Democrat, and I liked Bill Clinton. And then over time, I just tended to become, I think, socially very moderate. At one point, I think I was more socially liberal. I think now I'd consider myself moderate. And when it comes to fiscal items, I'm definitely conservative. And that does not mean Republican. I just want to be very clear about that, because Republicans and Democrats both, I think their favorite thing to do in Congress is to spend money. And that's the thing I hate the most of many things about how Congress works. So, yeah.
Two thoughts out of that. Just like, one, so I did move into middle class, but like when I was really young, similar sort of like dad was a plumber, mom was a school teacher, like not a lot of money. And then dad started another business and did a little bit better, like middle class kind of thing. But I think we both have that, like, we know what it's like to, and you even more so, like, know what it's like to like not have a lot, as opposed to like starting from all you known as middle class or all you known as upper class or whatever it is, like knowing the difference of not having money and having money, so to speak. So
I think really what we should do here is try to figure out who had the hardest life, because that's what a lot of people do at this point, I think, generally, is try to figure out how you can make it the hardest. This was the worst. But we'll talk about that off camera, and then next time we'll say, here's who had the hardest life, and we'll get a prize.
And that makes your opinion more valid.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I really want, is like, I had more hardship, so I have more of a valid opinion. So we'll discuss, we'll do that off camera, and then we'll have the award next time announced.
Would that be a straw man argument?
Oh, that's a great segue.
You like
and
that?
I'm just going to wrap up. Just one thing, I think the thing that actually just struck me. So I do love to learn things and change my assumptions. And it's crazy that I've known you for 20 years and I always assumed your dad went to church. I've never asked, but it's always been one of those assumptions. And I think that's important when you don't assume things about people or their thoughts or why they think things, which I think goes right into a great topic, which we discussed that we may want to cover here, which is straw manning versus steel manning. So we both, I think, did a good job there in our first episode of doing an intro to our first topic.
And a segue. And a segue.
Segue. Yes. That's the word I was looking for. See how we correct each other? And it's great.
How beautiful.
Yeah. So one of the things that I will say, Ben and I, in our conversations, I think correct me if you don't agree with this, but I think we both like to win, even if we do it in a nice way. Even if we're trying to be respectful, we do like to win. And that's something I personally am trying to get away from. And I think what I did a lot of when I was younger, and I think I have actually got better at this, and it actually really bothers me when people do it to me, is the whole straw manning versus steel manning. Ben, do you want to take a crack at explaining it, or do you want me to go through my little example?
Go for it, Ray. I mean, I can do straw man, you set up the argument in order to knock it down. That would be mine. Steel man is you set up the argument as in you believe it and you're trying to steel man, make it a strong argument.
Yeah, that I'm not even going to recover. I'm not going to change that. I'm just going to say I'm going to agree with that. I think those are good definitions. For me, like an example would be if we're talking about improving public transportation to reduce traffic, a straw man response would be, you just want to waste money on unnecessary infrastructure when we could use that for education. It's like, well, wait, you're ascribing a lot of things to that person and trying to find ways around what they're actually talking about. Whereas when you're doing a steel man argument, it's like, we should improve transportation to reduce traffic. It's like, all right, improving public transportation can reduce congestion, can lower pollution, provides more equitable access, all of these things, but we need to consider how to manage the funding and ensure improvements meet the community needs. And the thing that comes back to me, one of the things Ben and I talked about, one of my personal intellectual idols is a guy named Thomas Sowell. And he always talks about how there's no solutions, only compromises when it comes to politics. And that's something that stuck with me. And I think the idea here is instead of just saying you're wrong, it's like, oh no, I can understand where you're coming from, but there's some compromises that have to be made if you're going to, implement your idea. And that's what I'm concerned about here is figuring out if we do improve public transportation and spend that money, yes, it could be good, but what negative effects does it have? And let's talk about those things. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think is lacking in political discussions at this point.
Cool.
All right. So Ben, do you want to solve this problem for the world now? Do you want to talk about how people can get over straw manning or steel manning? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I want to, so I'm going to be direct and say, I feel like I want to pick up the tempo a little bit here too, of like, I guess at the end of the day, it's always been a thing, but I think even more so the problem now is that like, a lot of either mainstream media or even like Rogan might even be considered mainstream media at this point is like they're doing that as a common tactic in order. I'm working on this theory of like how people correlate and the levels of correlation and research that people do of like, it's sort of, it's like how people are attributing, and this goes back a long time, right? It's like how people attribute the economy with the president who's in office at that time. Yeah. Like if you know anything about economics, you know that the president in those 4 years doesn't have a ton to do with like what the stock market does unless they're doing something really out of control or rash. But by and large, most people are going to be like, well, when so-and-so was in office, the stock market was up. Actually, the stock market's at an all-time high. Biden's at the office. But, there's not a lot of people crediting Biden with that, whereas like when Trump was in office, oh, the stock market's at an all-time high. Trump's in office, I love my president. Like there's that to me is become more and more of a common thread is like, and I can do that for the opposite side of like, or the opposite side would be Bidenomics of like, oh, Biden's in office and inflation's up, it's Biden's fault, that kind of thing. So, and there are a little bit of factors in that, but long story short, I think that everything has been reduced down to this oversimplified argument by the mainstream media in order to just like smash as much into that segment and get a soundbite out of it. That's the quickest and cheapest way to get a soundbite. And so like, it just pisses me off.
Yeah.
But I think it's a symptom of the fact that like, we're so inundated with media that no one wants to sit and think about it. They're just like, I want to scroll to the next thing that's entertaining and send a meme to my friend, which we do. Right. But in the meantime, I want something that's also going to like give me some sort of chemical response and like get me a little amped up. And then, so that's my take on the rhetoric aspect of it. But I was also thinking of the tempo thing because I was like, man, people might get bored by us talking about like
again, Ben, let's go back to the initial idea. This is every podcast at this point is a little bit narcissistic. It's like, all right, everyone's going to want to hear our thoughts. So I think we should just ramble for an hour or two like we do in the car.
Okay.
No, I agree. But I think there's a couple things there. And I think this is something we should cover in a future episode, some of those root causes, because I think I agree with you. And I would say like even going back, covering some of the points you brought up when it comes to the presidents, every president wants to talk about how it's the previous president's fault and they're taking credit for it. So even something like Bidenomics, it was Biden trying to take credit for the stock market, and people were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What about inflation? It kind of backfired a little bit, but it's the same thing happens all the time. And I think the problem for me, there's a few ways this goes back. I think you're dead on with media finding sound bites. I think that's why Trump got into office the first time, because people were like, wow, like media was like, number one, I think he's going to lose to Hillary. And number two, it's great for ratings. So we get to get ratings for a while. We get to have someone that's going to lose to Hillary. And well, obviously he didn't lose, but the ratings were up, and it was that kind of love-hate relationship where, you know, we're not worried about what's actually good for the future of the country. We're worried about what's good for ratings and our pockets. I also think one of my issues, and I'm not sure if you'd agree with this one or not, is the fact that colleges at this point, and this is going for both conservative, Christian-based colleges and more liberal, progressive colleges, which I would say there's, to me, more of the latter, but we're not really teaching how to think, we're teaching what to think. And so I think people who maybe naturally aren't as intelligent tend to just kind of follow whatever their preferred candidate or candidates or preferred celebrity says. And even if you're intelligent and have all these degrees and things behind your name, you still oftentimes at this point, it's not that you're going to college to learn about opposing viewpoints. I feel like you're going there to learn, oh, you went to Grove City College, Christian college. Here's how you should think about marriage. And this is what the truth of marriage is. Oh, you go to some liberal college. It's like, well, obviously anyone who voted for Trump is a Nazi, and that is fact. Don't look into it. Just know that they're Nazis. And so I think that's part of the problem. And I think that's a much bigger topic to cover in the future. But I don't know. How do you feel about the college part of that? Do you agree?
Those are some good straw man arguments, by the way.
Go ahead. Give me an example of the straw man.
You're false. Oh, you want me to go for it? Like the false equivalency of like the Christian college was like, here's what you should think about marriage. And then the liberal college say like everyone who's is conservative is a Nazi. Those are like two very different.
I mean, they're different layers, but yeah, I mean, I think they're both. Yeah. I mean, to me, the point wasn't these things are equal on a footing. It's just, these are what people are learning in those places. So yeah, here's
how I would make it an equivalent of like the conservative colleges saying the liberals are trying to destroy this country, and the conservative colleges are saying, you know, like the liberals colleges are saying the conservatives are destroying the country, and the conservative colleges are saying the liberals are destroying the country.
Yeah, that's perfectly equal. Good job. I like the equality.
You know, I try.
Yeah, it's great.
That's why I'm about equality, because you know, a little more liberal than you. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God. We make some of those comments.
This is why we argue. Yeah, this is why we argue. So, yeah, it's the tribalism. So I think the bigger conversation, and I've had conversations, so kind of why I do like New York, because I was almost thinking about a segment for this of like conversations I've had this week, because I've had these types of conversations with different people in the back patio of a bar or whatever. People are a little more willing. Obviously, you're going to get a little bit more of a liberal echo chamber. I'm going to be the first to say that here, but you get a fairly broad variety. I mean, there's definitely, depending on what section of New York you're in, there's Trump, like Long Island is Trump voters. Parts of the Upper East and Upper West Side are definitely more Republican. You know, you get much more of a mix than it's led on.
Staten Island?
Staten Island is super, that's the joke. It's the only red borough in the five boroughs.
I thought it was, but I wasn't positive.
They're super conservative. That was the only borough that actually went for Trump as a whole. So New York City,
one of the boroughs.
Yeah. So New York City in and of itself is like actually very much of a mix, despite a straw man from, I would say, the conservative media side of like the liberal New York City. There's definitely elements of that, but so the case in point is having those types of conversations. And the bigger picture was like, so here's my theory on it, is that we're getting inundated with so many news sources, so much information, so much entertainment, so much social media, whatever it is, that we're now almost resorting back to this very base level tribalistic, like I need to know who's with me and who's against me. Mm-hmm. And I need to have a source of like a tribal leader to tell me, I believe the same thing, and I need to find some of these other people that believe the same thing, and we're in the group together, whatever side it is, liberal or far right or far left, because I think that there are so many people, there's so much noise that people can't understand it. I think there's some of us who can curate it and understand a little bit more, and there are people who are curators that then people do listen to. But yeah, I think that's part of the cause. I think also, like I was saying, there's so much entertainment. There's so many ways to distract ourselves that no one sits and thinks, right? And so they're just like, this thing that's loud and it gets me excited, it must be the right thing.
And I think that kind of goes back to your comment about scrolling and the endorphins and everything else that comes out from that. And we get that in
the dopamine.
Yeah. I think the same kind of thing happens with the news. And that's one of those things where I don't look at any political candidate as someone that I respect generally. There's not many. I mean, I can look back in history and I see some. There's a guy named Charles Sumner. I have his autograph on my wall back there. Do you know about Charles Sumner? Did we talk about this?
No, I don't remember.
He was a senator, a Republican from the North that was going against Democrats in the South for slavery. Basically was one of the first people to speak out about slavery on a broad scale in Congress, and got beat with a cane almost to death on the floor of Congress. And that was actually one of those things where people who were like, slavery is bad, but whatever. And then like, oh, wait, you're going to beat up a congressman? No, we got to do something about this. So that was part of the reason why things started to change a little bit. But the guy who actually beat him with a cane came back to Congress like a year afterwards. I think he eventually apologized, but Sumner was basically crippled for life. So those are the kind of people I don't think we have in politics anymore. And there's not many people that I can think of that I really do appreciate. And there's some that you and I, like a guy named Jeff Jackson, who seems like he's on the up and up. And I haven't seen anything to disagree with that assessment. But generally, I think politics now, it's always kind of been a money game or a power game. But now you tie in social media mixed with mainstream media, which could be considered liberal, or if you're going Fox News, I still consider that mainstream, and it's very clearly conservatively biased. And so you don't really get an accurate representation of the policies and why people believe what they do. And I think that's the thing when we come to our goals here in the podcast. We could go on forever talking about our backgrounds and individual issues, but we want to take big issues, have on guests that maybe disagree with both of us or maybe agree with one of us, and just have open discussions and really get down to the truth. Which, segue for the truth, I did look up Pew Research's party affiliation among adults in the New York City metro area, since you brought that up. 56% are Democrat or lean Democrat, 18% say they have no lean, and 26% are Republican or lean Republican. So there we got some numbers behind what we talked about.
Interesting. Okay.
Pew Research. So good. It was actually, I think it's always good to kind of go back to some of the numbers, but that's where we're at in New York. But that's actually a little bit higher than I thought for Republicans. So
yeah, I think that was going to be my commentary. Like, I didn't think it was a 50-50, but I think that it gets portrayed as like 98% Democrat.
Yeah.
Where it is a much more of a mix. I wonder how many of those people in that middle, like the sort of didn't tell you which one, were afraid to tell you that they might be more right-leaning.
That's true. I'm surprised that I hear you, but also 18% of people saying they don't have a leaning. I actually thought that might be higher, because I think generally in the population, there are a lot of people who just don't care, which I don't understand, but I think it's higher than we expected. And I would say if we're looking at a district that's 98% Democrat, would look whatever AOC's is, right? I feel like whatever district she's in, that's got to be 98%. But
the good straw man there. I don't think so.
Okay, for future podcast, if you don't agree with something, we just got to make sure we don't call everything straw man. All right.
Yeah. Well, that's only because it's a straw man argument. If I'm saying no, I disagree. But if you're making an assumption about, if you're setting up an argument about something, that's a straw man argument, man.
All right. Well.
Okay. If you would have said, I think that most of I wonder if, anyway, it doesn't matter. I wonder if most of AOC's district.
Yeah, I guess
we should look that up.
Yeah, we should look that up. I'm not going to do that right now. And I think generally with this first episode, really wanted to just kind of introduce Ben and talk about some of your background, my background. But we do want to make sure that as we go forward, we're really talking about issues. We've done episodes on a lot of controversial topics. And one of the things I've loved so far is that even guests that I disagreed with totally, I still consider them friends. And I've actually made new friends with people who I disagree with. We've had on guests that maybe people would assume that I wouldn't agree with, and we did an episode about prison reform. And I think oftentimes if you tend to be conservative in some areas, then people assume that, well, you just want more prisons and, more people need to be locked up and, that hammer of justice. And for me, I think there's a huge case to be made as to why we need to shrink the prison system. Not meaning let's release all the criminals, but I think there's better ways for rehabilitation. I think it has become an industrial complex, which just is a lot of money going to private organizations, and the more inmates they have, the more money they make. So there's all these things that I think are often misunderstood about both someone like myself who says they're fiscally conservative, someone like you who tends to have more liberal viewpoints generally than me. But why do we actually believe what we do? That's the important part, and that's what we want to focus on as we move through future episodes. So Ben, what are you looking most forward to as we start this journey?
That is a great question. I think highlighting, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, like the level of information that most people use to form an opinion or an argument. I think that we research one or two levels down. And I think that's the most valuable thing that I would hope that we bring forward and people get out of this, because I think that's what we bring to the table to each other. A lot of times it's like, it's a more thought out, more nuanced, more researched opinion on something that might be the mainstream. But it's like, because of that, I think it gives a better, and I think sometimes we come to the same conclusion where you wouldn't normally, like if you said it at like this higher level argument, you're not going to come to that. Whereas we go a few levels down and we say like, actually, here's some common bonds here. It's like a different approach, but also maybe here's the third way of figuring out a solution to this that no one's really coming up with. So to me, I think that would be the thing I would look forward to, is like how, with our differing viewpoints, even though we're like two white guys from Pennsylvania, right? Like just to put that out there, I'm be straight, two straight white guys from Pennsylvania. Yeah. Anyway, we still have a lot of differing opinions, but I think because we come from differing viewpoints and opinions that we end up sometimes finding a third solution that's beyond those other two solutions, or some sort of agreement that we're like, oh, well, this could actually work going forward. And so having that idea out there in the world, not that I think that we're like solving world peace or anything, but
hopefully,
yeah, eventually we'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there. But I think that aspect to me is what I'm most looking forward to, is like, yeah, bringing that stuff to the table, getting that sort of opinion out there that it doesn't seem to be out there as much.
Yeah. I agree. And I think going to your comment about going 1 to 2 levels down, I think that's something generally the reason why I enjoy talking to you, even if we are disagree or there's times where you're kind of pushing back pretty hard on each other. I have zero interest in talking to anyone who has a Let's Go Brandon t-shirt or a Trump for Prison t-shirt. Anytime I see something like that, or they're repeating any slogans, catchphrases, talking points they've heard in the media, generally I'm like, you know what, I don't care to talk to you whether I agree with whatever point you're making or I disagree, because I know that what I'm going to hear is the same thing I could get from Fox News or MSNBC, and I can watch those and hear what I'm supposed to think, but I love to hear why people think what they do and actually go 1 to 2 levels down. And so I actually agree with that. That's the reason why we talked about having you on as the co-host, because I feel like we can dig down, dig deeper. And, you know, the podcast is called Research the News, so we should probably research the things we see. So, and generally, I think that's what we want to do as the podcast. As we move forward, we want to, like I said, have guests on that we may or may not agree with, but really dig down to why people believe what they do. We want to make sure that people listening, they join the discussion. If you disagree with something we say, feel free to reach out. We have the website, researchthenews.com. You can contact us there and you can tell us, hey, you know, Ben, Ray, I think you're crazy. And you know what? We might have you on the show. I'm actually working out an episode with someone who disagreed with something one of our past episodes and had some really good points. And I said, all right, well, how about being on the show? And they agreed. So that's something we'll have in a future episode. But we love it. So if you are someone who thinks critically and thinks differently than us, if you have any topics that you might like to discuss, reach out. Would be interested in hearing what you have to say and potentially bring you on for a future episode. So for this episode, I know sometimes people say that maybe I ramble a little bit, and Ben, I don't know, maybe we both do. So I think that we should probably wrap up. I think this was a great introduction here, but is there anything you would like to say before we wrap up this week's episode?
No, I look forward to the next one. How about that?
I'm going to let you redo that one. We don't do edits on the podcast, by the way. If there's something major happening, we'll do edits, but otherwise it's going to be free flowing conversation. So I'm not going to edit that out. But what I am going to do is let you think about it for a second while I'm talking here and come up with like the best way we can possibly end this show that gets people excited for the future and also maybe solves world peace. So what do you have for us, Ben Hardt?
I look forward to getting a lot grittier on this, getting into the episodes, getting into the issues. You want me to do that one more time?
No, I think that's great. I think you both got people excited and solved world peace right in that
by getting grittier. That's really what gets them going. Yeah. No, I do. I think that this is like a very, you know me, I'm like, I call it as it is. I think this was like a very pleasant episode. Not that we get like unpleasant with each other, but I think also what I'm looking forward to when we do get into some of the more, I think we should get into some modern, you know, like, or current events, let's put it that way, and things, and really get into it. So I think that's going to happen. And that's what I look forward to the most. Is like, let's dig into this. Let's like roll up our sleeves and argue through it, and usually get to the other side with learning things and or coming to like an interesting conclusion. Or every once in a while we got to walk away, and that's fine too. But like, we're still friends.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
I agree. And I think future episodes will be more gritty than this. I think this will probably be the most pleasant exchange you'll see. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And I think the same thing for you. I feel like we just know that we're going to get in and dig in. We both have pretty strong viewpoints. But I think that's important. Even when you're talking with someone with strong viewpoints, if you can walk away and have learned something, it's either going to strengthen your own argument or you're going to learn something that might change your opinion. And I think either one of those are pretty valid if you really have an open mind when you're going into conversation. So looking forward to coming back for another episode soon. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us on the website and also all of our socials. We're just starting out with the social media stuff. But feel free to follow us. It's Research News on pretty much everything. TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. But we thank you for listening to this episode, and we're looking forward to coming back for another grittier episode of Research News soon. All right. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ray. See you, man.